you're joining us now, this is our fourth session of the day, and perhaps the most important one, as you're going to be talking to a parent. I want to welcome you all to the Preemie Power Week. I'm Fabiana Bacchini, Executive Director of the Canadian Premature Babies Foundation, CPBF, and your host for this event. The Preemie Power Week is the second of two international live series that CPBF is hosting 2020 in recognition of World Prematurity Day. These education sessions are in collaboration with the International Family Integrated Care Committee, the Canadian Association of Neonatal Nurses, EFCNI, and GLANS, the Global Alliance for the Newborn Care. For those not familiar with CPBF, we are a charitable organization, and our mission is to support and educate Canadian families of premature babies every step of the way. We believe that through consistent information, access to helpful resources, and peer support inside and outside the NICU, we can empower families, ensuring they are ready to care for their baby. Consistent information is especially important today when we are facing a global pandemic. With educational sessions like this, we intend to bring you the guidance of healthcare professionals and the knowledge gathered by researchers around the world. These are valuable tools to help our community raise awareness and advocate for the well-being of families and their babies. I would like to thank AbbVie for the unrestricted educational grant and Pampers for supporting the Preemie Power Week. And right now, we talked to three healthcare professionals, and we felt their passion, their advocacy to keep families together during the pandemic and beyond. They are working fiercely around the world to change the situation for parents in many NICUs around the globe. And right here, we're going to talk about a parent experience in the NICU during the pandemic. Lori Romas, preemie parent, talking about her family journey in the NICU at the beginning of the pandemic. She was transferred to another province, separated from her baby, and forced to cope alone. Out-of-province protocol prevented Lori from seeing her husband and other children. She was stranded a few hours from home with only her purse and winter mukluks, forced to choose between staying with her new infant or leaving him behind to return home. Lori, thank you so much for joining us here today. I know it's a roller coaster being out of the NICU for only 5 months. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join us here today to really share your story and bring the numbers and the result of those surveys to life. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me today.
So, Lori, let's start from the beginning. How did you end up in NICU? You had already 4 kids at home, all term babies, and then all of a sudden you are in the NICU. How did that happen?
Well, that's the interesting start of our tale. I actually work in our small community hospital in Kenora, Ontario, and I'll call it mother's intuition that brought me into hospital. I just wasn't feeling the baby kick. It wasn't a high-risk pregnancy. I was about 32 weeks along, had been working at our hospital till this point, and all evening I just had this nagging feeling that something was wrong. I wasn't feeling baby kick. So I couldn't go to sleep that night. Around 3:30 in the morning, I decided I would phone the hospital that I worked at just to get a bit of reassurance. I phoned in, and it was one of the maternity nurses that I knew quite well, who had been there for one of my other babies. And she said, "You've got to come in. We've got to check this out. Don't be embarrassed." So I told my husband, I said, "I'm just being anxious. It's no big deal, but I need to go into the hospital just to reassure myself." I said, "Don't bother coming. I've got this." So I drove myself to the hospital, or where I work, and they hooked me up to the monitors. And at first, everything was fine. Everything was really reassuring, other than I wasn't feeling baby. And all of a sudden, the heart rate started to dip really low. I saw the change in my nurse's face, and I knew it was serious. She said, "We'll be calling in the doctor." It's a small town, so we don't have obstetricians. She phoned in my family doctor, who is also a coworker of mine, and he came in pretty quickly. And he told me, "We're going to have to do a C-section." And I kind of said, "Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, yeah." And he said, now. And that's when it became kind of real. So I phoned my husband and I told him what was happening. It also happened to be our oldest child's 17th birthday. She was still at home sleeping. So there I was at hospital, 32 weeks along, going in for an emergency C-section. My family doctor was quite frank with me. He said, we don't have time to transfer you. We're doing this here. I haven't done a section this early before. Baby's either going to come out crying or he won't. I didn't know if I was having a girl or a boy. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I was rushed into the operating room. It was so reassuring being surrounded by familiar eyes. This was when the masks all started for me in my operation. But all my concerned coworkers were right there. My doctor had phoned in the NICU team from Winnipeg who were flying to Kenora to pick up the baby. It was a successful delivery. I heard my baby cry. They announced, you have a boy, and he was whisked away from me immediately. I didn't get to see him. They stapled me up and got me stable again. I quickly got to lay eyes on my son, Scott, and my husband quickly did as well. Before I was transferred by land ambulance and Scott was taken, he was flown to Winnipeg, where we were hopefully going to meet up again. So I was loaded into the ambulance. Scott was flown by an airplane, and we were on the road headed to Winnipeg. And when I got there, that's when the chaos started.
Lauren, just to give people a little bit of perspective, that was March 27. That was 1 week and a half into the global pandemic, right? It was right in the beginning. And just to give people an idea, you were very north of Ontario, closer to the border of Manitoba. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, we're about a half-hour drive from the Manitoba border. We're about a 2.5-hour drive into Winnipeg. But we are Northern Ontario still. We're Winnipeg's cottage country. Our small town has a population of about 15,000 and balloons to over 60,000 with the Manitoba tourists. So
that was your closest option to be transferred, wasn't South Ontario. Just give people a perspective of where we were physically located. That was the choice to cross the border. And that time the borders were closed between Ontario and Manitoba. So tell us what happened with that transfer when you got to Manitoba. What happened?
Well, you're right. It's the closest center, and where we are in Ontario, Winnipeg is actually our catchment area for high-risk pregnancy, pediatrics, and obstetrics. I had my daughter up to Children's Hospital in Winnipeg less than 2 weeks before for an appointment. We had gone there quite regularly. However, when I got to the hospital in Winnipeg, we weren't allowed in the emergency door. So they unloaded me a second time at the cancer care door. We weren't allowed in the cancer care door. So I got unloaded a third time at the main entrance of the hospital. There were people smoking outside. A kind smoker opened the door so we could be wheeled in the stretcher. The ambulance attendants actually lied to get me into the hospital. They said, no, we hadn't been out of Manitoba in the last 2 weeks. Obviously, we had just come from Ontario, but they didn't know what to do either. And they did get me in and brought me up to a room where I was basically left and told, we'll give you an update at some point.
Right, and then your husband didn't come with you. You're by yourself. So once you stay in the hospital for a few days, what happened next?
Okay, yeah, my husband couldn't come. My family couldn't come. I was basically treated like I was an active COVID patient from where I came from, being out of province. It didn't matter that I had passed our work screening tool for 2 weeks and worked in an Ontario hospital, had no travel history, had no symptoms. We were labeled as active COVID patients. So I was isolated in a maternity room on Ward E, and Scott was isolated in the NICU. When I came to hospital, there was a delay in seeing him because infectious control had to clear us both. So although we were both at the hospital at the same time, it was hours before I could be cleared to go to the NICU.
So when you told me before that you could hold him many hours later with a lot of scrubbing on your chest and gloves, and tell us about that experience, Lori. Certainly not what you expected.
This was the farthest thing from what I expected from my pregnancy. It was like a movie. I couldn't have imagined this if I had tried. To leave my room, I had to put on a bright yellow gown, one of their isolation gowns. I had to wear a face mask. On top of that face mask, I had to put on a face shield, and I had to put on gloves. I couldn't go through the regular entrance to the NICU. I had to go through a back entrance. I had to get buzzed through several doors and relied on staff to do that for me. And then basically had to stand at the back entrance to their isolation room until the nurse was free to let me in. Once in, I had to change all of my gear. And when Scott was about 16 hours old, I was told I was allowed to hold him, do kangaroo care, I should clarify. To do this, I had to strip off all my isolation gear, basically be left standing in my fancy hospital mesh panties at the sink, to be scrubbed down thoroughly, my chest and my nipples, so I was safe to have my baby laid on me. I still required the full face shield, the mask, the gloves, the gown, but he got to lay on my chest, and all of a sudden it felt like it was real, like I truly did have a baby. And it was a great feeling, but it was so scary and very, very lonely.
We cannot even imagine what you went through, because the first time you share your story with me, both of us were in tears just to imagine what it is and believe that experience for you. So we're very grateful to have you sharing this with us here today. But I also know that you're in a center that is very, very supportive of kangaroo care, and I'm very grateful to them that they make that happen for you, even in that very extreme circumstance right at the beginning of the pandemic. But Lori, after your first week, how was the NICU stay? Because the first week was like obviously fresh C-section, moving from place to place, far away from your family. And then did you settle? How did you settle? And did you get any support in the NICU while you were there?
I consider myself really lucky that I work in a hospital setting, so I did know to ask for a social worker while I was admitted to the hospital. They were working remotely at the time, but the social worker felt that she could come in for my case. There wasn't a lot of options. All the Ronald McDonald houses were closed. I basically was left without a support system. I wasn't planning on coming to Winnipeg. I had a purse and mukluks and a hoodie. I don't even know where my pants went. But yeah, it was chaos. My younger sister, who lives in a town a few hours away from me, was able to get a hold of a connection she had in Winnipeg, who brought some clothes to the hospital for me, because my family was not allowed to come up whatsoever. And I was told if I was in contact with anyone from Ontario, I wouldn't be allowed back in the NICU. I was really grateful for my family, because my family, although they weren't close, my parents and my sister found an Airbnb close to the hospital where I could stay, and I'd be able to walk back and forth to visit. I don't think I would have had the mind to be able to do those simple tasks at that time. The nurses were very supportive of me. They were advocating on my behalf and kind of saying, this is really silly what we're doing here. This policy needs to change. once I was settled in the Airbnb, it was a lot healthier for me to have a home environment, but it felt pretty foreign, not seeing anybody I knew or having any connections in the city.
Absolutely. How did you cope alone with no family around, no husband, and without seeing your other kids?
I think I was just on survival mode. I look back and I'm not sure how I coped. I don't think I coped very well at times. I also had this immense fear of judgment. Like mentioned, Scott was my fifth baby. So all my other babies, I just got to take home. I was a capable mother. I could do this. And all of a sudden, I felt like I wasn't very capable. I was being told I couldn't look after my baby. And looking back at some of my pictures, I see how swollen my eyes were from crying, and I don't think I coped well. I missed birthdays, I missed Easter, I missed a boyfriend breakup, I missed teeth getting lost, the start of homeschool. I just survived. I don't think I coped.
Absolutely, Lori. This is a lot of stories that are coming to us from families. And I mean, the NICU is hard anytime, any given time is hard. And obviously adding this extra layer is absolute surviving mode. But what would you now, 5 months later, that you're home with your beautiful baby, what can you recommend other parents to do to cope with this situation? Because I know you talked to me about it, you had some time to reflect. So what can you tell other parents in your shoes right now?
Well, I understand a lot has changed, so that's positive. I hear there's bedside rounds again. I hear there's technology like iPads allowed for communication. None of that was in place when I was admitted. I would tell parents to be an advocate. I insisted that they write on Scott's board, Mom likes to give his baths. Mom will do his baths. Advocate. I'm trying to advocate for some changes so people don't go through what I went through. Everybody needs a support system. I saw my daughter's ophthalmologist when I was in the NICU, and I think he thought I was crazy. I was so excited to see somebody I knew. I felt like I was doing jail time. And yeah, I saw him last month with my daughter, and he goes, "You're doing a little bit better." And then he didn't realize I was alone for almost 40 days. So reaching out to people, accepting help, and speaking up when the system is broken and we need to readjust.
Absolutely. This is so important. Lori, what do you suggest to other healthcare professionals to support families who are alone at this time?
The nurses and one of the housekeepers, they really were my support system. Some of the nurses took the time to learn my name. They didn't just call me Mom, they called me Lori, and that meant the world to me. It just made me feel like a person, not a number. I want other healthcare professionals to understand that people aren't at their best in these situations. So that woman who seems full of anxiety and stress and is about to derail, that probably isn't who she truly is. It's that survival mode coming out. So to have that no judgment and just continuous offers of support.
Absolutely. Lori, let's talk about getting ready to go home. You spent 40 days in the NICU with your son. Did you have any preparation, any education classes or on one-on-one with nurses on how to care for this little baby at home after discharge?
Well, I mentioned my baby made his surprise appearance on my oldest daughter's 17th birthday. She was supposed to get a new phone for her birthday, and I was going to take over her old one. So that didn't happen. I was left with really old technology when I was in Winnipeg. I think it was an iPhone 5 I had. All the resources were technology based, so I really couldn't access any of them, which was unfortunate. I couldn't do that till I got home. There wasn't a lot of teaching that went on. I am an experienced mom, which did me well. But it was hard learning all those things and trying to remember them without having another parent present. My husband really has no understanding of what the NICU is or was like, just my recollections of it. I understand things have changed, but the discharge was pretty limited on what we were given. And the follow-up too, it was just kind of expect a letter in the mail about follow-up. I was a bit worried about that letter. I just got it this week, so that was fantastic, but it leaves people with this gap. Full-time care 24/7, then you're discharged and you're on your own.
Absolutely. Lori, let's talk about discharge day. It was, I'm sure, a celebration day for you and your family. Your husband met Scott in the parking lot of the hospital. So how was that piece of the first reunion?
Oh, discharge day was great. In the NICU, you never really know when it's coming. So Scott had his NG pulled one day and was discharged the next. Because we come from Ontario and the rules were still in place, I could not have my husband come up to the NICU for discharge. I had a really great nurse who helped me collect, I can't even believe how much breast milk I had stored in their freezers, bags full, all our goodies. And she helped me carry those in the car seat down to the front entrance where we waited outside, and my husband pulled up in the van. We were able to load Scott up. He got a quick peek at him, and then we drove to my Airbnb so we could take him out and Daddy could actually hold him.
Well, I don't know if people can actually see the picture, trying to share the picture of your husband with Scott for the very first time. It is definitely a very special moment. But tell us when you brought Scott home and they met his siblings.
Oh, that was so exciting. So my kids have given me heck over the last several months. Mom, you disappeared in the night and you just never came back. So when I finally did get discharged and we got home, we were discharged mid-afternoon, so we didn't return home till evening. All the kids were waiting up. They couldn't wait to meet their brother. It was really heartwarming, though. They came to Mom first. I got all the hugs first. And then it was just disbelief. Look at the size of him. Who gets to hold him first? You weren't lying. There really is a baby. Yeah, it was great.
It's definitely a beautiful picture of your family. Lori, how is life now, several months after the NICU?
Life now is great, despite being in the middle of a pandemic. I feel so fortunate. I feel so much gratitude to so many people. Scott is the most popular member of our household. He's everyone's favorite sibling. He's just so loved. It was a rough start, but I'm trying to focus on the outcome, which has been fantastic so far.
Absolutely. Lori, thank you so much for joining us here today. On behalf of everyone at CPBF, wish you and your family a lifetime of health, because I think that is the most important thing that we need in the world right now, especially during the pandemic. So Lori, thank you.
Thank you.